The billion-dollar failure. How Viagra was born. In 1992, a group of Welsh miners enrolled in a clinical drug trial for a heart medication. And when the researchers came to collect the unused pills at the end of the study, the men refused to give them back. Not because the drug had saved their hearts, because of what it was doing south of their hearts. Pfizer had just accidentally invented the best-selling drug in human history while trying to solve a completely different problem, and the scientists almost threw it in the trash. Let's go back to 1989. Pfizer's research lab in Sandwich, England, yes, Sandwich, is running one of the most promising cardiovascular trials in the company's history. The drug is called UK92480. Not exactly a sexy name, but the science behind it? Genuinely beautiful. The team's goal is deceptively simple. Treat angina pectoris, the crushing chest pain caused when your heart muscle doesn't get enough blood, by relaxing the smooth muscle tissue and coronary arteries and increasing blood flow directly to the heart. The mechanism they're targeting? An enzyme called phosphodiesterase type 5, or PDE5. Think of PDE5 as the bouncer at the nightclub of your blood vessels. Its job is to break down a molecule called cyclic GMP or cGMP, the molecule that tells your blood vessels to relax and open up. PDE5 shows up and kills the party early. UK92480 was designed to fire the bouncer, block PDE5, let cGMP do its job, let the vessels open up, let the blood flow, save the heart. Beautiful theory, clean mechanism, solid early data. There was just one problem: it didn't work. Meet Dr. Ian Osterloh, a quietly brilliant British pharmacologist who, in the early 1990s, looked like every science teacher you've ever had. Rumpled, precise, and completely uninterested in fame. Osterloh and his team had been running early and mid-stage clinical trials on UK92480 for months. The results were disappointingly weak. The drug barely moved the needle on angina. Patients weren't reporting meaningful chest pain relief. Blood pressure dropped, but not enough to matter. By the standards of pharmaceutical development, this was a dead drug walking. But buried inside the patient survey data, in a section most researchers would have skimmed past, there was a pattern that made no sense. Male patients were reporting an unexpected side effect, and the research team was about to make a choice that would either make them legends or get them laughed out of the industry. We'll get to what was in that survey in 60 seconds. But first, you need to understand why this discovery nearly died before it began. Here's something the pharmaceutical industry doesn't advertise. Over 90% of drugs that enter clinical trials never make it to market. The pipeline is a graveyard. Failed compounds are abandoned every single day. Research teams are reassigned. Files are closed. In 1992, Pfizer's internal review committee was seriously considering pulling the plug on UK92480. The angina data was weak. The compound wasn't hitting its primary endpoint. And Pfizer, like every pharmaceutical giant, runs on return on investment. You don't get a billion-dollar valuation by chasing hunches. But Osterloh's team did something unusual. They actually read the patient feedback forms, all of them. And what they found, reported almost sheepishly by a cohort of Welsh miners who really did not want to hand back their pill bottles, was this: spontaneous, unexpected, and dramatically improved erections. Now here's where most scientists would have noted it, chuckled awkwardly, and moved on. Osterloh didn't move on, because he understood something critical. The mechanism made perfect sense. PDE5, the enzyme UK92480 was designed to block, isn't only present in coronary arteries. It's heavily concentrated in the smooth muscle tissue of the corpus cavernosum, the spongy erectile tissue inside the penis. Block PDE5 there. cGMP floods in. Smooth muscle relaxes, blood flow surges, and suddenly the bouncer analogy gets a whole lot more interesting. The drug wasn't broken, it was just knocking on the wrong door. Here's where the story stops being a feel-good science documentary and starts feeling like a corporate thriller. Because pivoting a cardiovascular drug into a treatment for erectile dysfunction, or ED, in 1993 was not a simple decision. It was a war. First, the internal war. Pfizer's own executives were skeptical. ED, at the time, was barely discussed in public. It was treated as a psychological problem, not a physiological one. The dominant medical consensus was that most erectile dysfunction was in the patient's head. Funding a full clinical program for a condition that half the medical establishment didn't even classify as a disease? That was a hard sell. And there's something else, something Pfizer discovered during this pivot that they absolutely did not want to publicize. Something about how the drug interacted with a specific class of heart medications, something that would eventually kill people. We'll come back to that. But right now, Pfizer is making a massive bet. They redesigned the entire clinical program. New endpoints, new patient populations, new trials, this time specifically targeting men with organic erectile dysfunction, meaning physiological causes, not psychological ones. Diabetes, spinal cord injuries, post-prostatectomy patients, men who had no other options. The trials were extensive. Phase 2 and Phase 3 programs spanning thousands of patients across multiple countries, and the efficacy data coming back was, by pharmaceutical standards, extraordinary. But getting the FDA to approve a drug for erectile dysfunction meant navigating one of the most conservative regulatory environments in American history. In one of the most socially conservative decades of the 20th century, the FDA demanded mountains of safety data, long-term cardiovascular effects, drug-drug interaction profiles, dosing optimization across different patient populations, bioavailability curves, pharmacokinetic modeling. And every step of this process cost money, hundreds of millions of dollars. Pfizer spent roughly $2 billion developing sildenafil citrate, the compound that was now being fast-tracked as a potential ED treatment, from initial discovery to FDA submission. $2 billion on a drug that started as a failed heart pill. The FDA Advisory Committee reviewed the data in 1997. The internal debates were heated. This was uncharted territory. There was no regulatory playbook for a lifestyle drug that addressed sexual function. Some committee members worried about misuse, others about the cardiovascular risks in men who, ironically, had the heart disease UK 92480 was originally designed to treat. But the efficacy data was undeniable. In clinical trials, sildenafil produced successful erections in 70 to 85% of men with organic ED, compared to roughly 20% on placebo. On March 27, 1998, the FDA approved Viagra. It became the fastest-selling pharmaceutical in history. In its first 3 months on the market, Pfizer wrote 37,000 prescriptions per week now. About that thing Pfizer didn't want to talk about. Remember that question we opened? The dangerous drug interaction? Here it is. A significant percentage of men who suffer from erectile dysfunction also have cardiovascular disease. That's not a coincidence. ED is now understood to be an early biomarker for endothelial dysfunction, the same arterial damage that precedes heart attacks and strokes. The penis, it turns out, is a remarkably accurate cardiovascular early warning system. Uncomfortable fact? Useful fact. Many of those men were already taking nitrate medications, drugs like nitroglycerin and isosorbide, for their angina and chest pain. And here is where the biochemistry gets lethal. Nitrates work by also increasing cGMP, the same signaling molecule Viagra was boosting by blocking PDE5. Combine a nitrate with Viagra, and you get a catastrophic synergistic drop in blood pressure. We're talking pressures that can plummet to dangerously hypotensive levels within minutes. The medical term is hypotensive crisis. The layman's term is, your heart stops getting enough blood, and you die. In the months following Viagra's launch, reports began surfacing. Men, mostly older, mostly with pre-existing cardiac conditions, were dying during or after sexual activity while on Viagra. The FDA logged over 130 deaths in the first year linked to Viagra use. Headlines exploded, Congress held hearings, Pfizer's stock trembled. But here's the question that nobody asked loudly enough at the time. Was Viagra actually killing these men? Or were they men who had no business having vigorous sexual activity, regardless of what drug they were taking, because their hearts were already failing? The FDA's own analysis concluded something nuanced and deeply inconvenient for the panic narrative. The rate of cardiac events in Viagra users was not statistically higher than the baseline rate of cardiac events expected in age-matched men having sex without Viagra. In other words, sex, for men with severe cardiovascular disease, was already the risk. Viagra wasn't necessarily pulling the trigger. But in men who combined it with nitrates, that interaction was unambiguously, demonstrably, lethally dangerous. Pfizer updated the label, contraindication with nitrates, black box warning. The deaths slowed. The controversy didn't fully die, but the drug survived. Because for the millions of men for whom Viagra was safe, the men with ED and no nitrate dependency and reasonably functional hearts, it was genuinely, life-alteringly transformative. Studies began emerging showing that Viagra didn't just restore sexual function. For many patients, it restored confidence, relationships, mental health, and quality of life in ways that standard clinical endpoints couldn't fully capture. One researcher described it as giving men back a piece of their identity. So where does this leave us today? Viagra, sildenafil citrate, has generated over $36 billion in revenue for Pfizer since 1998. It spawned an entire drug class, the PDE5 inhibitors, including Cialis, tadalafil, and Levitra, vardenafil, drugs that collectively reshaped the global sexual health pharmaceutical market into a $4 billion per year industry. But here's the part that should genuinely blow your mind. Sildenafil is now one of the most important drugs in pediatric pulmonology, because PDE5 inhibitors don't just dilate penile blood vessels. They dilate pulmonary blood vessels, the vessels in the lungs, and in children born with pulmonary arterial hypertension, a devastating condition where dangerously high pressure in the lung arteries slowly destroys the heart. Sildenafil is now a first-line treatment. The drug that Welsh miners refuse to give back is keeping children alive in ICU around the world. And it goes further. Researchers are currently investigating sildenafil's potential in treating Alzheimer's disease, because the same vascular mechanisms that affect erectile tissue and pulmonary tissue also affect cerebral blood flow. A 2021 observational study published in Nature Aging found that sildenafil users had a 69% lower incidence of Alzheimer's compared to matched controls. Is it causal? We don't know yet. Clinical trials are underway. But think about the trajectory of this molecule for a second. 1989, designed to treat chest pain, failed. 1992, accidentally discovered to treat erectile dysfunction. 1998, approved, became the fastest-selling drug in history. 2005, approved for pulmonary arterial hypertension, now sold as Revatio. 2021, potentially linked to Alzheimer's prevention. One molecule, designed for one thing, failed, then spent the next 3 decades accidentally saving the world in ways its creators never imagined. Ian Osterloh, the rumpled British pharmacologist who read the survey when everyone else would have filed it away, received the Prix Galien Award, one of pharmaceutical research's highest honors. He never became a household name. You've never seen him on a talk show. He doesn't have a Netflix documentary. But the next time you hear that science is just a series of controlled experiments marching neatly toward predetermined answers, remember a group of Welsh miners who wouldn't give back their pill bottles. Remember a scientist in a town called Sandwich who looked at a failed drug and asked the question nobody else thought to ask. And remember that the most important discoveries in human history almost always begin the same way, with something going completely, spectacularly wrong. Which other blockbuster drugs were born from total accidents? The next episode will wreck you. If a failed heart pill can change the world, the least you can do is hit subscribe. It'd change my day.